A24 movies, they gotta have power. Alright, new A24 horror film from the brothers of Robert Eggers in their directorial debut. Been waiting, 40 years for Beetlejuice 2? But goddamn guys, without marketing, I could not wait to see the front room. So this seemed to be going in a much different direction than brother of these directors, Robert's work. First off, this wasn't going to be a horror film that's like rich or deep in folklore. Nah, this just seemed to be your next horror film with a creepy old woman with what seemed to have a little bit of dark comedy to it. So very short premise here for reading for this film. This film's premise reads, a pregnant woman is relentlessly harassed by her husband's cruel stepmother in the feature directorial debut from Sam and Max Eggers. So does the front room continue the solid filmography streak in the Eggers' name, and even more so, is it another solid addition into A24's horror catalog? Well guys, let's talk about the front room. So I'm actually just gonna jump immediately into the character of Solange, which, after seeing this movie, just seeing what, in fact, this character gets into, that is probably the most grossest thing I could fucking say. But obviously we're gonna talk about her. And the reason why I'm starting right off the bat with her is because there wasn't really anything special about this film, like up into her intro in the film, which she does come in pretty early on, but just the backgrounds of Brandy's character and her husband, it's nothing bad, it's just simply nothing special. It goes like this: Brandy plays this college professor, she's getting replaced a lot at work, they got a baby on the way, and on top of that, they're also still working on paying off the house that they're in. Their lives are just literally a mess, so Brandy's character says. And then one night, the husband's phone rings to an unknown number, and immediately, not just even from the second that you hear Solange's voice on the other line,
who's this?
I am his mother.
But the second you hear the husband's reaction, immediately you're like, oh yeah, she is gonna be the film. Which I will say, from the trailer, I didn't really know what kind of relationship Norman, the husband, would have with this stepmom character. I will say I had some suspicions, some predictions as to like how his character might be involved with the story, where his character may overall end up playing out as far as like a character type. But just the first hint at like what him and his stepmom's relationship actually is, it was one of those things where I was like, huh, well, I'm glad that that wasn't shown in the trailer. That's something that kind of threw me for a loop. And even more so, even before like Solange gets into the picture, there is like little details that you wouldn't think of as anything unless you did in fact see the trailer. For example, the chair that Solange is sitting in her room or the nursery, it is revealed very early on when you first see that chair. That is actually the chair that Norman's birth mother actually held him in. And so from just that reveal, I was like, okay, I am starting to see those very uncomfortable coincidences. But then it's revealed that Norman's father has passed away, and then they go to the funeral for him, where they do actually meet Solange. And the couple gets pretty much guilt-tripped into bringing her into their home. She's like, oh, I'm old, I'm alone now. It was also your father's last wish to have us together. And with me so far in this age, I just want to spend the rest of my life with family. And like the trailer says, she is also willing to give him all the money she's got, which would obviously help them pay off the house. And obviously once she enters the home, this is where the movie really begins, and we slowly start to get like more breadcrumbs at this woman's background. And again, like with Norman having so much rage and like just being very stressed out when he finds out that it is his mother that is calling him, or his stepmom. This is also where like the first taste of like the film's comedy comes in, where he was like, oh, my stepmom was awful to me as a child. She was so religious, and she wouldn't even let me watch Nick Jr. because it was fucking ungodly. All I could watch was one episode of VeggieTales. And I'm actually just gonna go as far as to say that this is not a horror film. This is a dark comedy thriller. Which actually, at least the first half or like first act or so of this movie, it is just an unhinged dark comedy. Like, I will say, there is shit that happens throughout the movie, even during these just dark comical scenes that are supposed to be just that, where it is equally as horrifying and just like, yikes. Where I would actually say that like, even when the movie is not trying to be those comical scenes, that it is like trying to be more serious. Well, I wouldn't say serious. This is not by any means a serious film, but when it's not necessarily focusing on being the dark comedy side of this movie, I just still found myself busting out laughing more than I ever found myself, if ever, actually frightened by anything in this movie. But again, going back to it, the second that Solange gets on screen and she gets into the home more so, you get exactly what kind of stuff that this film is going to include, especially its dark humor, which I did predict, but also just very early on, you just get immediately thrown into that fun, uncomfortable, cringy mystery as to who this woman actually is. And along with just slowly more things added to lead up to this woman's full background, prepare yourself. This movie is pretty disgusting very early on and throughout. Which a lot of that has to do with this woman, Solange, being an elderly woman. And the punchlines, man. For example, there's a scene where Belinda, Brandy's character, she goes into the living room and finds the couch just soaked in fucking piss. And she's like, Solange? And then Solange just goes, oops, I confess. Because the character is also just equally what you would imagine out of an old, bigoted, Bible-thumping old woman that is just out of her mind and doesn't really understand anything as far as how to deal with anyone that is 40 years or more younger than her. So for example, when this nasty shit happens, and Belinda, for example, is like, Solange, she's like, oops, I confess, better pray for me. And you're just like, what the fuck, dude? But one thing I will say is just an immediate nitpick is actually the horror side of this film. It comes in very unwelcome and at a very abrupt shift where you can just tell tonally and how it's introduced that it's that kind of thing where it's meant to be vague, where it's supposed to obviously lead to more and more of what the reveal of this woman is or what the movie fully has up its sleeve, but it's also just very cliche for what is shown and ultimately just comes off feeling very disappointing. Yeah, I would say if anything this movie is a dark comedy thriller and it just kind of ruins how that should have been actually advertised for this movie. And now, getting into the later half of the film, where it's that story point where, the baby is born, the way that enters the film as a story point, it is just maybe even more abrupt than the horror segments, and more tonally random, and pretty much just more of, everything that I felt was wrong with the horror elements, where with even more so, this being what should be the most important story point of the film, especially how it was marketed in the trailers and stuff, it just really felt rushed and just not handled well as a direction. And even going so far as being the real turning point between Solange's and Belinda's characters, just as a transformation as well, and actually how much more unhinged the film quickly becomes with this story point and with this transition. It just felt rushed in every way and with everything that was incorporated to this aspect of the film. Which I will also sadly say that once this comes in, being the last act of this film, it also just kind of drains out the comedy aspect completely, where it does just try to be that more horror-like elemented film. But again, just the horror in this film, it just isn't good, it's not memorable, it's not original, it's not scary, and even more so with how much of the movie is actually this comedy and how solid that part actually lands of the film, it just kind of feels even more so just out of place and just kind of there. And lastly, which is even more fucking sad, don't even get me started with how rushed and abrupt and just out of place the whole reveal and ending feels, which it was kind of that thing sadly where I was like, well, with it being an indie horror film and with this film centering on a mystery, I feel like there's gonna be some holes in this film, especially with the film being only 80 minutes or so, or 86 minutes. And yeah, it is that kind of ending where it just, a lot of things didn't really add up. It felt like it had a lot of holes, and with the movie being only 86 minutes, I just couldn't help but look back at the things that didn't work and just think, holy shit, this movie could have been just a solid 75 minutes. You can clearly see that this is adapted from a short film, which I didn't even realize until the opening credits stated. But still, up to that, and just throughout the film, I do think it is still a solid unhinged mystery throughout. It is just a bit hit and miss as well throughout. And overall, I'm still going to give The Front Room a solid review. Hallelujah! So guys, that is going to do it for my review of The Front Room. Guys, Astrobot. It is time. This week is gonna go straight to Astrobot. I know Beetlejuice 2 is out, but again, just this film and Astrobot, admittedly, I am more excited for those than Beetlejuice. We're getting into Astrobot, baby. But with all that being said, guys, let me know what you thought about the film down in the comments below for those that did see it instead of Beetlejuice 2. But with all that being said, guys, I'm going to wrap it up here. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video very soon. Take care.